Hello, everyone. L.C. Holt here. This is my update for the week of March the 9th. Sitting here with Rebecca Ivey.
Hello.
And like myself, Rebecca Ivey was a huge fan of the TV show Quantum Leap. Do the whole thing. We'll just sit here.
Will you two block us?
Because you always want to do at the end the whole little,
yes.
But they don't have it in the theme song.
But my favorite part was
and you can find remixes of these too. There's a really good guitar one, which you wouldn't think that would sound good on a hardcore electric guitar, but it actually does.
I want a dance club hit.
Well, let's talk about the actual show now that we've gone through the.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Quantum Leap was the brainchild of a guy named Donald P. Bellisario. Now, a lot of the shows I grew up watching were his. Donald Bellisario was like the David E. Kelly of his time, in so much as he created a whole lot of very successful shows and wrote a lot of the episodes for them.
Magnum Pi?
Yeah, where we get to that.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I'm just excited.
But
I'm excited.
But not quite as abundant a writer as David E. Kelly, which infamously wrote every episode of his shows back in the old days. And in fact, the staff writers of his show used to say, "Why am I even working on this? He won't let us write anything." Donald Bellisario actually would let other people write, but he usually set up the tone of the show, wrote the first four or five episodes, and then would write throughout the season. And
he gave them a structure to follow.
Yes, and he very much he was the spearhead of it. He was the showrunner in the best sense of the word. He controlled the output and made a lot of creative decisions. The first show that he created, as you sort of led into, was Magnum Pi. That was the first really successful one he created for Tom Selleck, who had done some pilots that had not been very successful. Yeah. So one of those series that had not been successful had been written. He hadn't created it, but he wrote an episode for it. Donald Bellisario did. And Tom Selleck said, "You write really well for me. So would you come create a show?" And Bellisario did. And he said that his style of writing and Tom Selleck's kind of meshed well. A style of acting kind of meshed well. And so we got Magnum Pi out of that, which ran for 8 seasons from 1980 to 1988.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I was a little too little to get Magnum Pi. I never got into it. I remember like my grandparents watching it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something I sat down and watched. It was kind of like Cheers. I liked the theme song. So I'd sit through the theme song, and since the theme song was over, I'd go to the other room and play.
Yeah. But he had the thing about Bellisario, and this goes even to this day, is he always liked to include military elements in his shows. And that didn't necessarily mean that everyone was, a military. Yeah. It wasn't like MASH. It wasn't every show was like a MASH sort of thing. But like, for instance, Magnum, was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and he had been a Vietnam veteran. And Bellisario was very much about writing Vietnam veterans in such a way that they didn't. His problem was he thought so many things were written where soldiers came back from Vietnam and were crazy serial killers and stuff. And Bellisario was like, I don't want to write my shows and my characters like that. So I want to represent them as people.
I was going to say a lot of films and television shows in the 80s, had a lot of characters. Of course, that generation. It was people in their 30s and 40s.
Recent memory.
They served or they were, they lived through it.
But you even go into shows that he did. Another really popular show that he did after Quantum Leap was Jag, which ran for 10 seasons.
I wasn't a fan of that show.
But that was about naval investigators. The main character actually is a member of Jag, who is basically a naval lawyer.
Did you get into that show?
Not really.
I didn't either.
NCIS is a show that's still running.
I couldn't get it. I'm sorry for those that like the show. I couldn't get into that one either.
And that was sort of Bellisario's creation, and he was with it for a long time. As I said, NCIS is still running. 17th season it's on. Bellisario was not on the show for that long because he had problems with Mark Harmon, who was the star of the show, and Bellisario kind of just said, "You have it, man," and left.
You can have it. Take it to summer school.
But it's a very, very popular show even to this day. And that, of course, The main character in that is a former Marine gunnery sergeant, and was a scout sniper. So again, this military thing goes through it. And for Quantum Leap, which we're about to start discussing, has a military element in one of its main characters, Al Calavici. Now, to get into a little bit about where the show came from, Belisario, after the success of Magnum Pi, was asked by NBC to develop a show for them, and particularly Brandon Tartikoff, who really liked, he ran NBC very famously. Everyone, of a certain age, you've heard of Brandon Tartikoff because a lot of the shows that you like were shows that he greenlit.
Yeah.
Well, Tartikoff really wanted Belisario to make a show for him. And so Belisario had been developing throughout the years an idea that originally started as a possible episode for a show that Belisario had written called, he didn't create it, but he wrote episodes for Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, yeah.
And Belisario had this idea about time travel. They didn't use it on Battlestar, but he kind of kept it in his mind. And over the years, throughout the 80s, he continued to develop it and think of how it could be its own show, not just an episode of somebody else's show, but it could be its own series. But he knew that in order to do it as a TV show, you had to have ground rules. And so when he came in there, he pitched to Brandon Tartikoff the idea of a show called Quantum Leap. And he said, the show is about time travel, but it's time travel with rules. So rule number one, the character is only able to travel within his own lifetime. And Belisario rationalized this. Hey, Carl, how you doing? CW joining us on the chat. Belisario rationalized this by saying, the way we're going to keep an audience interested is if they feel like they're related to what's going on in the story. Yeah. He said that if you set stories in ancient Rome, for instance, people aren't going to be able to understand that.
Yeah.
But if you had a character who was born in the early 50s, and he can only travel between the early 50s and the time the show was made, which was in the 80s.
Well, I was going to ask, is it from the day he did his first leap?
His first leap.
Okay, because right now he's supposedly still leaping. I mean, can you now go into the 90s and the 2000s?
Yeah, as long as Sam is alive, he can travel anytime within his lifetime.
But it has to be.
No, it doesn't.
In other words,
no, it doesn't start on the day that he leaped.
Okay.
It can be any time.
But as the days progress, he can leap into those days.
Yes, he can leap into those days.
Okay.
It has to be within his own lifetime.
I just want to make that clear.
And yes, so Belisario's idea was if you start in the late 50s and you go up to the 80s, you're always going to have basically scenery, locations that people can relate to. There's going to be cars. We're never going to go into the Old West. There's going to be houses and businesses. It might be period oriented. The clothes will be different. But basically, people at home can relate to these sorts of stories.
And you're dealing with social issues that they grew up with.
Yes, it's very relatable. It's basically what I'm telling you, what Belisario rationalized. Another rule was that Sam could not leap bodily. He actually had to leap into another person, which is not part of the plan when he created this whole time travel thing. But when he started leaping, he discovered that he's actually not leaping as himself, at least not at first. He's leaping into other people and taking on their persona. So whoever's around, they see Sam as the person that they knew. They don't see him as Sam Beckett.
And I remember as a kid, it was like, ooh, who's he going to be this week? Because it would always be kind of funny when he would be like, a woman. Yes.
And he would look at himself in the mirror and Sam would see the person that he leaped into. He wouldn't see himself. But yeah, it's a very interesting idea. And Brandon Tartikoff heard this idea and he said, I don't get it.
Yeah.
And then Tartikoff during that meeting said, okay, pitch it to me in 30 seconds in such a way that my mother would understand it. And Belisario was like, okay. And so he pitched him it in 30 seconds. And at the end of that, Brandon Tartikoff said, I still don't understand it. But you know what? I believe in you. So go off and do your show. And that was something Belisario said about Tartikoff later. He said that Tartikoff didn't always have to understand the concept, but he was the kind of executive who believed in the person.
Can we bring that back?
God, I wish we could. Yeah,
so much meddling.
It's the dying breed, that sort of thing. Now let's talk a little bit about the character of Sam Beckett, who is the lead in Quantum Leap. The character of Sam Beckett is a guy that was born August 8th, 1953 in Indiana, the son of a dairy farmer named John. Now, Sam Beckett was a prodigy from birth. He could read at the age of 2. He did advanced calculus at the age of 5. He played Carnegie Hall when he was 19 years old. He was also a piano prodigy. He had a photographic memory and IQ of 267, and he wound up graduating from high school at 16 and going to MIT. At MIT, he wound up getting, count them, 7 doctorates. 7. Sam Beckett had a doctorate in music, medicine, quantum physics, archaeology, ancient languages, chemistry, and astronomy.
Overachiever. But I don't know if you're going to get to this, but
yeah.
His father dies.
We'll get to that.
Oh, and his brother.
Yes, we're going to get to that. We're going to get into all this, Rebecca.
We're getting all into it.
Hang on.
Sam's business.
We're going through this whole thing. But the one thing, and this was played to humor several times throughout the series, was Sam couldn't cook.
Oh, yeah.
Sam could do all these things, but he couldn't cook. And so there were a lot of episodes, especially when he was playing mothers and stuff, where he was trying to cook.
Like a 1950s housewife.
And he couldn't cook a lick, He could do everything else. Now, Sam Beckett in 1989, we're talking story time now. We're not talking like
real life.
In 1989, within the show, Sam Beckett created Project Quantum Leap. And it was based in an underground complex, which you learn in the pilot episode is actually the place where the first atomic bomb test was done in New Mexico, because Al says it in the opening scene. Now, within the story, in 1995, after getting government funding for Project Quantum Leap, which dealt with an idea that he'd come up with a professor when he was at MIT called the string theory of time travel. And if I had a string, I would demonstrate it for you. But basically what the idea of Sam's concept was, you have a piece of string. The one end of the string is your birth, and the other end of the string is your death. But if you take the two ends and you put them together, all the points in between can touch each other, no matter where it is. It's like making a loop out of your life. And using this theory, he said you could time travel within the boundaries of your own lifetime, from the time of your birth to the time of your death, any day in between. And so the government wanted to get their hands on this naturally. So they funded this Quantum Leap project out in New Mexico. And that's where Sam constructed a supercomputer called Ziggy.
Oh, Ziggy.
And he put together several...
After Stardust?
I have no idea, but it's a good name. And it was voiced by one of the writers of the show, Deborah Pratt. Did the voice of Ziggy, who had a feminine voice, even though it was really just a multicolored computer console. He built an accelerator, which was what was going to cause you to travel through time once you stepped into the accelerator and activated it, and an imaging chamber, because he had this idea of creating one person would leap and another person would guide them using Ziggy. And the imaging chamber was the person who was going to be the advisor or the guide would go into the imaging chamber. It would connect with his brainwaves, because Ziggy has Sam's brainwaves programmed into it. So no matter where he is in time, Ziggy could connect to his brainwaves, and he would project as a holographic image, ingenious idea, this guide who could help Sam in his travels in time. Now, the whole idea, though, was Sam was going to use this to leap as himself anywhere in time, but that Ziggy would be able to pull him back, retrieve him, as they said, whenever he wanted. Well, the government was going to pull its funding, and as is generally the case, he should have learned from Bruce Banner. You had to be careful not to test these things on yourself.
So say on the fly.
Right. And that's what happened is Sam Beckett, when the government was going to pull the funding, got into the accelerator and he activated the machine, and suddenly he leaped out of the contemporary time of the story, 1995, which was futuristic in 1988 when the show was, and went back in time. But there was a slight problem. because he did not go back bodily in time.
That's right. He leapt into a pilot.
He did in 1956, because remember, Sam was born in 1953. So he leapt back to 1956, and that was the subject of the pilot episode, which was called Genesis. And then at first, this was another unforeseen problem. When Sam leaped, for some reason, his memory got all fucked up. He called it Swiss cheese memory, because all huge holes opened up in his memory. Like when he leaped into this pilot,
He didn't know who it was.
He didn't know who he was. He knew that when he looked in the mirror, something was weird. Like that wasn't me, is what he thought. But he's like, why do I feel that way? But for all he knew, he thought he really was this pilot who had amnesia. And this strange event happens where he feels himself getting pulled out of that body and then gets pulled back into it. And what he doesn't know until Al shows up as a hologram, Admiral Albert Calavici,
Right.
the government liaison of the program, who's there to watch out for the government's assets, but who has actually become best friends with Sam Beckett throughout their time together. Al has come back as a holographic projection. And in the opening episode, he had to convince Sam that you are indeed from the future. I'm a hologram. You know, he's passing his hands through things. So you're obviously, I'm a hologram. And your real name is this, this, and this. And we're trying to pull you back because that feeling, that sensation Sam had of being pulled out of his body was actually them attempting to retrieve him. But the problem was, for some unknown reason, which remains unknown really until the final episode of the show, they're not able ever to retrieve him, no matter how hard they try. And that's part of the interesting thing about the show. Another thing Al comes up with is we don't understand why we can't retrieve you, and we don't understand how you're going to get back. So the theory is that for some reason, you have to do something in the past that will warrant you leaping again. And this brings into play the tagline of the show, which is that Sam is destined to put right what once went wrong.
That's right.
So this is another really unique concept, because using the Ziggy computer, they go back through historical records to find out who he's in, whose body he's in, and what happened in that person's life.
And you also find out in another episode that the person that he leaps into, they go into his body.
Yes.
And they're sitting in the waiting room.
That's right.
Type.
Which is a little bit confusing, because in the opening,
figure it out.
In the opening thing, they always say Sam Beckett stepped into the accelerator chamber and vanished. Well, he kind of vanished, but his body is still in the future. This is, as I'm trying to explain this sounds really complicated.
But if the person's in his body, why don't they just go up to him and like, who the hell are you? And have them tell him who they are.
How do you mean?
Okay, so Sam, let's say Sam jumps into Susie.
Yes.
Well, her consciousness goes into his body.
His body, yes.
Well, you just said that Ziggy has to figure out who they are. Why don't they just go up to her and say, who are you?
I don't know. Maybe they do use
And Sam Beckett goes, Susie.
Maybe they do use that that method, because we don't see a lot until later seasons of what's actually going on in the future, because we pretty much stick with Sam in the past.
Yeah.
And the only thing we see of the future is Al when he comes back with his little Ziggy handheld device.
That's right. I always thought it. Remember those little blocks we used to get to count with in school? I always thought they just had like a clear one, and it was like different color plastics they glued together.
And remember, the handset was different at different times.
It was.
Because originally it had like this kind of gold band on it.
Yeah.
And then eventually it became like this thing looked like a Lego. Because I remember I had some colored Legos and I made a Ziggy handset when I was a kid. Because let me tell you something.
But
when this show premiered, March 26, 1989, after that point, if anybody got between me and the television when Quantum Leap came on, you were going to get fucking crossbowed, and this was years before your next.
And it came on Wednesdays.
Yes. Well, originally, it did.
Because I remember my parents sending me to church on Wednesday nights, and I would be annoyed if I missed Quantum Leap.
Yes, and you had to run to the TV, and it always opened with those notes, doo-doo-doo, and then and this whole thing would start.
I was going to say, if you were pretending to be Al, let's talk about those outfits he wore.
I tell you,
like a pimp in Vegas.
They tried to predict what the future would be like in 1995, the distant future of 1995. And cars were shooting. They weren't flying, but they could shoot around, because Al had that car that had like the supercharger on it. And he could shoot through the desert on it. And he would always wear like really bright colored, like vinyl jackets.
That's right.
With see-through plastic ties that were crazy colors and stuff.
It looked like New Wave meets plastic.
Yes. We have a couple questions. You want to read the questions?
Which one?
So I can, I'll try and answer it. CW said, from the past to his present, but not the future, correct? Quantum leap is something I got to get more. Okay, yeah. Well, that was an idea originally that he could not leap into the future. In the later season, what they decided was they wanted to try and do an episode where he leapt into the future, but they just never did it. We'll talk about when we get to the final season. They had some really high concept ideas that they never got to implement.
And one was kind of felt like they were trying to be Twin Peaks. The one when he goes in the bar and he keeps seeing people.
Well, let's get there.
Okay.
We're going to go through all these episodes. We have 5 seasons to talk about.
Okay.
So CW, he also asks, not only time leaping, is there any story of leaping from reality to an alternate reality? No, they never really did that kind of thing in
Except for
Quantum
the one
Leap.
Yeah,
but that wasn't an alternate reality. That was just, they never really did anything like reality jumping. It was pretty much, and they didn't really get into the whole like Back to the Future, we're skewing into a tangent and stuff. They kind of tried to go easy on that because I think they wanted to make sure, even though it was a complex idea, that the audience could understand easily what was going on.
So basically the reality we know, he had already changed.
Yes, basically we're living in Sam Beckett's reality. We're just hanging out, but it's Sam Beckett's world.
That's right.
And we'll get into an example of that.
Yes, because I want to talk. Yeah, famous. I know which one,
But let's go ahead and jump into some of these episodes. The first, we find out more about Sam. She sort of alluded to it, but we find out more about Sam's personal life and his background actually throughout the show. Mm-hmm. There's never a moment like in the pilot episode where Al sits him down and says, well, your sister was this and your brother was this and this. But we do find out throughout Leaping that certain details, like for instance, there was an episode, the 3rd episode, where he leapt into this lecherous like college professor and he meets this girl and he knows somehow that he knows this girl from somewhere. And her name is Donna. She's played by She's played by Terry Hatcher. Yeah. And so what we find out is that the reason Sam recognizes Donna is because Sam had fallen in love with Donna. So this is the first time really that his life and who he's leaping into are starting to sort of mix together. But because Sam has that messed up memory, he's trying to piece together what actually happened. And what he remembers eventually is that Donna stood him up at the altar. And it broke his heart, but she was always the one that he loved. And so we see that and we learn a little bit about that, and more about that comes into play in a later episode because Sam kind of helps young Donna because he still remembers her. She doesn't know who he is. Mm-hmm. She sees him, of course, as the college professor who's trying to pants everybody.
Yep.
But, so that was the first time we started to learn a little bit about Sam's personal life and his backstory beyond just him being a genius who created time travel. There was also some a lot of the future episodes connected like celebrity appearances and Sam meeting people before they were famous, like the episode with the pig.
Buddy Holly.
That was in the first season where he fortuitously meets Buddy Holly, and we find out Buddy Holly wrote Peggy. There was also a lot of inaccuracy.
I was about to say, because that's not what happened.
No, in Sam Beckett's world, Buddy Holly wrote Peggy Sue based on a pig, which is not the truth.
It was originally Cindy Lou, his cousin, and then his bandmate was like, "Oh, let's change it to Peggy Sue because I date this girl named Peggy Sue, and we're kind of on the outs, and I kind of,
So if you ever wanted to know, there it is.
There it is.
Nothing to do with a pig. But there were other interesting episodes. There was the episode in the first season that you like to call the Driving Misstasia episode.
So I watched it. I started rewatching Quantum Leap last year. And that episode came on. And I remembered watching it as a kid, but now as an adult, I'm watching it. I'm going, oh, this is like the TV version of Driving Miss Daisy. This must have just come out in Jessica Tandy must have just won her Oscar.
And for people who don't know, the thing about the episode was he leapt into a African-American chauffeur, and he had to help this woman who was a widow of an Alabama governor. So it got into the civil rights issues because he's there in the 60s. And it's basically Driving Misstasia.
Yeah, and he doesn't know who he's leapt into, so he goes and sits at the counter. And everyone's like, what did he just do?
Yeah. And the social issues, social commentary was a huge part of Quantum Leap, particularly as it moved forward. But this was the first time it kind of dipped its toe into that kind of waters. But that's the interesting thing about doing a time travel show that's set within these particular decades, is you get to talk a lot about, social unrest. You get to talk about the Vietnam War, protests against it. Civil rights, racism. There were a lot of feminism. There were a lot of things that you could tap into and relate to people more by, doing these shows.
It was about the baby boomers.
And it wasn't really an issue type show either.
No, but it did. But this is something that it did that I feel like a lot of shows and movies miss the mark now. They presented this information and these viewpoints in a way that it was entertaining. And I think it tricked some people into getting into it rather than feeling like they were being preached at.
Right.
It was entertaining. And therefore it somehow, it taught people. You get what I'm saying?
I do.
It wasn't so.
There was a famous director who said this one time. He said that if you make a movie where you're telling the audience, we're going to sit you down and we're going to talk to you about this issue, and then you're going to learn how to live a better life, the people who don't agree with that won't come see the movie.
That's correct.
So you're preaching to the choir.
Yes.
He said if you can make a story that's just a good story that has that as the subtext, then more people will come and more people will get the message.
They will. And you at least get people thinking about it.
And that's what Quantum Leap kind of did, because it had there were fights and there was, romance and there was all these different things. There was this complicated and very intriguing and well thought out time travel scenario. And
it didn't matter, who he leapt into. If Great Granny had a thing for Sam Beckett, she's always going to root for Sam Beckett.
Yes.
It's not.
And that was the interesting thing that Belisario said, because one thing studios and, television studios did not like at the time were anthology shows. And Belisario really pushed Quantum Leap because he said, we can do an anthology show where every week we can do a different movie that can be anything we want it to be. And you'll have two characters who the audience can get involved with, because the old idea in television was if you have an anthology show, there's no one for the audience to root for and to connect to. So therefore, people won't watch on a week-to-week basis. I would argue The Twilight Zone, was successful, but with Quantum Leap, that wasn't really. But with Quantum Leap, you had the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
You had two characters who were very likable, who you could really understand and get to know. And you had the anthology format where every week you could do whatever you wanted to do. You could do any kind of story, and they did any kind of story.
Yeah. Some weeks it would just be silliness.
Yeah.
And then the next week would be, about the impact of the Vietnam War on families.
I remember they did everything from serial killers to comedic episodes where Al was like a rocket.
Yeah.
It was all kinds of stuff. There was in the last episode of the first season only ran for 8 episodes because it was a mid-season replacement.
And also I noticed in the first season, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the first season, sometimes he'd leap in the middle of the episode, where didn't later seasons he would leap at the end of the episode?
He always leaped at the end later, yeah. The first episode, he leaped into 2 people.
Yeah.
The pilot episode had 2. After that, it was pretty much just one story.
Okay.
But in the last episode of the first season, which was called Kamikaze Kid, we learned a little bit more about Sam Beckett. That's when we learned that Sam Beckett had a sister and that she grew up to have an abusive relationship because the idea of this episode was Sam was trying to save someone from an abusive, and it triggered.
It was his sister.
And it triggered the idea of his sister, and that. So we learned a little bit about Sam's family.
And did that little place where they were racing, did it kind of look like the same racing spot that Grease took place?
It probably was. It probably was. Now, the first full season of 22 episodes was the second season. And I think in the second or first episode of that, we learned more. We learned that there was a disco episode. Disco Inferno. because that was within that time period too. A lot of things happened in Sam's lifetime.
The Kiss, like the Kiss type band. Remember that one?
Yes, yeah. But in Disco Inferno, Sam remembers that he had a brother who died in Vietnam. And this becomes important as well. An older brother. His sister was younger than him, but he had an older brother who died in Vietnam. And I think one or two episodes later, we got to see for the first time in the second season, Sam leap into a woman. Mm-hmm. And that was always fun because Scott Bakula, who plays Sam Beckett wonderfully, he was always nominated for Emmys and never won them. And I think that is a shame. Because tell me one person on television at that time who showed off as much talent as Scott Bakula did from week to week on Quantum Leap. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty amazing because you have to think about it. Sam was everybody at one point or another.
Well, what was so hilarious about when he leaped into a woman, he put on the dress, but the dress wasn't the size she wore. It fit him, and he's got like the big manly chest and all his chest hair hanging.
He's a big guy. He's like
but then when you look in the mirror, like the dress is like this big, and it cut back to him, and he's like this in the dress.
And I think that was for our benefit.
Yes, and then he'd wobble around in his heels.
Because I think maybe he fit into their clothes.
He did, because he's in their body.
There was a little bit of confusion in the series from time to time because it gave hints both ways as to whether when Al was in the imaging chamber talking to Sam, did he see Sam as Sam the way we saw him, or did he see them as the person?
When he leapt into the secretary, remember Al had the hots. He's like, I'm so confused. You're Sam, but gosh, you're gorgeous.
Because it seemed like Sam would see him as the person sometimes. And then other times it seemed like Al saw Sam as himself. So I don't know. That was a little... But regardless, back in the waiting room, they all saw the person as Sam, Al included. Now, I remember there were all kinds of little things. Do you remember the episode where it was a Jewish rabbi and it had Dr. Heimlich in it? And this goes back to the whole thing where he showed Dr. Heimlich how to do the Heimlich maneuver. There were some really kind of cheesy things like that tied in. There was one that's kind of interesting now because remember the one with the Christmas episode where he met Donald Trump as a little boy?
Oh.
And he was like, one day there'll be towers to the sky in New York and there'll be a big glass one right over there. And as the kid got out, the guy who was with him was like, come on, Donald, come on, Mr. Trump. And you go, which nowadays it's kind of a really funny thing. But at the time it was like, and he showed Sam and he was like, Trump, And
the one with the abused sister, when he found out he had a sister because the guy leapt into his sister was being abused by her fiance. He goes in the bathroom and little Michael Jackson comes in and he teaches Michael Jackson how to. Yeah,
that's right. Sam was responsible for every pop culture thing.
You thought Forrest Gump was.
No, it was Sam. It was Sam Beckett. There was the one where Sam leaped into the boy with Down syndrome, which we were talking about earlier, Jimmy. And Jimmy actually came back for the final episode, him and his brother, because Jimmy had a brother in that. Michael Madsen guest starred in that as the bully, the longshoreman that was mean to Jimmy.
Oh, yeah.
So that was probably the first time I ever saw Michael Madsen in something, and kind of knew who he was in that episode of Quantum Leap, season 2. There were all kinds of things. There were even some coincidental things, because there was an episode called All Americans. And it was a football episode, and it was set, and Al is talking, he's coming from the future, and he's talking about, in 1996, he's watching the Super Bowl, and he said that the Steelers were 3 points behind. And lo and behold, in 1996, the Super Bowl, the Steelers were actually 3 points behind at the end. And so that was predicted 6 years prior to it actually happening. That's like one of those Simpsons did it first things.
That's right.
Quantum Leap did it first.
That's right.
We also got to learn some of Al's background throughout these leapings. Like there was the last episode, second season, where we learned that Al, this is actually a really important episode to the overall story, because that's where Sam leaped and he met Beth. And Beth, we come to find out, was Al's first wife. Al's a womanizer. We didn't really get into Al's personality too much, but Al is known as the ladies' man.
That's right.
and he's smoking his cigars, and he's kind of hip for an older admiral in the Navy.
With his plastic ties.
And he's fashionable. He's all kinds of fashionable. Well, originally, before he was a womanizer, he was very much in love with a woman named Beth. And Al went to Vietnam and was shot down, became a prisoner of war. And Beth was led to believe that Al died in the war. And so she remarried. And so when Al was discovered alive and came home, he realized that the love of his life was gone. She had remarried and moved on with her life. And so then from there, Al became, who we know of as Al. The thing about it was Sam tried to kind of help Al out with Beth. But what he ultimately realized was that he couldn't do it. He helped so many people, but he couldn't help Al. And that season, the second season, ended with, Al as a hologram dancing with his young wife. Remember?
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
And it was the first time, and she doesn't seem to understand. She's kind of dancing with herself in her mind. Mm-hmm. And Al is dancing with her as a hologram. So it's sort of like a ghost, but she doesn't seem aware.
I'm sure Ghost was out at that time.
Probably. And so anyway, that was the first thing that was actually where I came to love that song, Georgia on My Mind.
Oh, yeah.
And every time I hear Ray Charles sing Georgia on My Mind, I think of Quantum Leap. And that episode, because that's what Beth and Al were dancing to.
Yeah.
And as he leaps away, because Al has to go with Sam. So when Sam leaps, Al disappears. And you get this nice little moment at the very end of the episode where Beth seems to, it's almost as if she'd sensed him.
Yeah.
And this comes back to play in the final episode.
Yeah.
So let's not spoil it.
Okay, we'll spoil it.
Let's not spoil it. We're only on season 2.
But they do touch on Al's life a little more throughout episodes.
Yes.
Because there's another episode where you actually see him
as a younger man. Mm-hmm. Sam leaps into Al.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about that when we get to season.
And I'm also talking about 4. The one with the
And the audience is like, how many fucking seasons are in this?
Yeah, the one with where he leaps into the Vietnam buddy, and then there's the reporter,
mm-hmm.
and then the reporter was going to cover something, and you see Al
as a prisoner of war. Yeah. Season 3 opened with the leap home,
mm-hmm.
and Sam didn't go home as in to his present home. He went home as into his boyhood home. And Sam leaped into himself as a young boy, which you got to see his brother, who was much talked about, as just before he gets sent to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. You got to see the sister, Scott Bakula, who was a Broadway star before he was a TV star. He was actually in a lot of musicals, and he was known for his voice. Scott Bakula, which a lot of people don't know this, but he got to perform a lot of music throughout the show. And in this episode, he performed John Lennon's Imagine to his sister, who the sister is like, well, prove to me you're from the future, because Sam is trying to basically get people to listen to him when he's saying, don't send my brother to war because he's going to die. And so to prove it to his sister, he performs a song that won't be written for many years, because the Beatles are still together at this point. Mm-hmm. And the sister starts to cry because she realizes he couldn't have made that up. That's too good. And because he's just a little boy, so she starts to cry and everything. It was a nice little emotional moment. And that was a 2-part episode, mm-hmm. The Leap Home, because in the first episode, Sam tries and fails to get his brother not to go to war. And then he leaps again, and you think he's going to leap into a whole other situation, but he actually follows his brother and leaps into one of his brother's war buddies in Vietnam, and is actually there with his brother in Vietnam.
And that's the episode I was talking about, that you see Al at the
Yes, at the end. And that was an episode where, he got to save his own brother. So Sam did save his brother from dying in Vietnam. And you also, in the first part of that episode, you got to see Scott Bakula play a dual role, because remember, he played Sam's father as well. Yep. In heavy makeup. He played John. And we also learned throughout that episode that his brother died in the war. His father later died of a heart attack.
That's why he keeps fussing him about, don't eat that. You need to exercise. Stop smoking.
He was a heavy smoker. And Sam always felt guilty because his father had died while he was away pursuing his academic career at MIT, and he wasn't there. So Sam always had a little bit of guilt that he wasn't there with his father when he died, because he was pursuing his own things. So, and then eventually that resolves itself in a later episode where we get to see him play a dual role again as father and son. Now, I remember, I want to jump really quick into the season finale of the third season, which was called Shock Theater. That was a really interesting episode. Mm-hmm. That was the one where he leapt into a mental patient right before he was getting electroshock treatment. And so Sam got electroshock treatment, and it erased everything. And Sam thought, and throughout the episode, again, it goes back to Scott Bakula getting to be, all these acting opportunities, things people would kill to do, he got to do week to week because he got to play Sam as a crazy person. Because Sam in the institution thinks that he's everybody he leaped into. Mm-hmm. The one thing Sam doesn't remember after electroshock treatment was being Sam Beckett.
Yeah.
And Al is there as a hologram going, I can't communicate with this guy. He sees me, but he doesn't know who I am. How am I going to get him to fix the thing he needs to fix so he can leap out of here? And by the way, they're about to give him another electroshock treatment. So the clock is ticking. And so Al, something we learned actually in some of the earlier episodes is that not only Sam could see Al, but certain other people could see Al as well. Children, dogs, and in this case, a person who was the people in the asylum, crazy people can see Al. And so the whole mission is to teach one of the guys in the institution how to read. And so since Al can be seen by the crazy people, Al actually has to fulfill the promise to get Sam to leap because Sam is incapable of doing it. So Al teaches this guy how to read, which is an interesting flip, you know. Is that Al, as a hologram, even though he's not physically there, he has to do Sam's job for him. In desperate hopes of getting Sam to leap before the next shock treatment. And as the episode ends, he's being given the next shock treatment and he leaps. And then you find out in the first episode of the fourth season that something went wrong because lightning struck Project Quantum Leap. And for some reason, Al himself was sent back in time. And so the whole roles were reversed in that episode, which is one of my favorite episodes. It's called The Leap Back. And in that episode, you get a literal role reversal. Mm-hmm. Sam is the hologram, and Al is the person who's leaped into this war hero who's come back home. And so Sam, for the first time, gets to go home. He gets to leave the imaging chamber. And that's when we saw Gushy before. Gushy was like a project technician. He was known for his bad breath. And there were a couple other people. There was Tina, who was Al's girlfriend, one of Al's many girlfriends. There was Verdina Beeks, who was like the psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. And then you got to see Donna.
Yep.
And in this episode is the first episode where you realize that when Sam helped Donna back in season 1, he changed his own future. And Al kept it secret from him. And on Donna's request, because Donna said, if you tell him the changed reality, he might not do what he needs to do. That is to say, sometimes Sam needs to have relationships with women. And so if Sam knows that he's actually married, because spoilers, the way he changed the past for himself was that he and Donna she didn't stand him up at the altar. They got married.
Was his brother waiting there for him too?
I guess so. Not in the episode. And so what happened is, so that's when we kind of learned that Sam is actually married. And I think part of the whole thing was, yes, Donna didn't want Al to tell Sam because she didn't want Sam not to sleep with another woman if he had to. But look, I think it was also for the audience's benefit because you don't want Sam to seem like he's a lech. Yeah. Like he's got a wife waiting at home and he's bedding all these women from week to week, which he didn't always bed women. But there were times when Sam had sex with women.
That little saxophone music would come on.
That's right. The 80s saxophone. And so I think it was sort of, if he's going to be married, you have to kind of solve that problem so he doesn't seem like a jerk. And I think that's a fine way of solving it. And obviously, Sam has to go and save Al. So he leaps into Al, who is in this other guy's body. And then he gets stuck in the past again. And everything is put back the way it was with Al as the hologram and Sam as the leaper. And when he goes back, I remember Donna asks Al at the end of the episode, she says, well, does he remember me? And Al says, no. And so that way you set it back where now Sam can have sex with other women and the audience won't think he's an asshole. But there were all kinds of things. There was an episode we left into a chimp.
Oh, yeah.
Like a NASA chimp. And there were high concept ideas for future seasons.
Oh, there were. Some of them made me very angry.
One season, one idea that they had that was never done, and this kind of plays into the chimp thing, is they had this idea that Sam was going to leap at one point into a cartoon character. Now, how that would have worked, I have no idea. There was another one where they were going to have Sam leap into a computer.
Now, I heard that they were talking about having him leap into Magnum Pi.
They did. Actually, they shot it. At the end of every episode, when Sam leaped and he found himself in for like 30 seconds and whatever the next episode was going to be, and he went, oh boy, the episode would end.
Oh boy.
They actually shot a scene where Sam leaped into a guy with a Hawaiian shirt with the sunglasses. And then at the end, Sam turned to the camera. This sounds really cheesy. And he dropped the glasses like Magnum and went, oh boy. And that's when you knew that he had leaped into Magnum Pi. They never shot the rest of the episode. But somewhere out there, that footage exists of the teaser of Sam leaping into Magnum Pi.
That would have been awesome.
But that would have made more sense than the cartoon character.
Yeah.
The reason I was saying the cartoon character in the computer is because the Space Chimp episode was the only time Sam ever leaped into a non-human. Luckily, they never went there again. And certainly not in like cartoon territory.
That would have been more in what Carl was asking earlier. Alternate reality.
That would have been, that would have been hard. Because if he leaps into a computer, what's he just going to sit on a desk for the whole episode? I mean, it doesn't really make very much sense. Now we were going to talk about that high concept.
When they show the mirror, he's just
and it's just a Macintosh. It's just
no, but when someone like opens a compact, he's just sitting there leering.
Yeah, right.
You see his reflection.
It would have been terrible. High concept season was the 5th season.
Oh, yeah.
This is what I call the high concept season because basically they threw every idea they possibly had, and not all bad.
And this was the last season?
But they didn't know it.
They didn't know. Okay,
no.
I always thought they knew, and that's why they did all this stuff. They were like,
no,
we're going out with a bang, folks.
Yeah, and I kind of always thought that too. But what I later learned was this was not supposed to be the last season. It just, for some reason, turned out to be the high concept season. Opened on a high note, though. Lee Harvey Oswald. 2-part episode where Sam leaped into Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh, that was promoted. I remember that all over TV.
Mm-hmm. And
particularly the follow-up episode,
Yes, because the interesting thing about that episode, you were talking about were there ever more than one leaps in episodes? Mm-hmm. Really, there weren't, other than the first episode and the Lee Harvey Oswald 2-parter. Because what happens in that, for some weird reason, Sam keeps leaping to different points in Lee Harvey Oswald's life. And another concept they brought into that, which was really interesting, they never really explained why it happened, but it was interesting, was that Sam and Lee Harvey Oswald's personalities would sometimes shift. Like, for some reason, Sam, because it was always kind of set up that when Sam leaped into somebody, he took on certain traits, but he was always just Sam. Mm-hmm. But with Lee Harvey Oswald, sometimes he would find himself becoming Lee Harvey Oswald. And that character, that sort of persona would take him over and get him into horrible situations that Sam Beckett would have to then get back out of when he woke up. So it was a neat little idea. I'm glad they didn't do it for more than this episode, though, because making him schizophrenic would have been, I think, maybe a little bit too much. But it worked for this because, of who Lee Harvey Oswald was and all the kind of problems you could get the main character into because of that. I'll tell you an interesting story. Donald Belisario was a Marine in the 1950s. He met Lee Harvey Oswald. One of the reasons he was interested in doing this is because Belisario said that his son went to see the movie JFK and came home and started talking about this conspiracy theories seen in JFK about how Oswald was a patsy and it was this, far-reaching government conspiracy. And Belisario was like, look, I knew that guy. Let me tell you something. He definitely could have done it alone. In fact, I think he did. Belisario did not believe in the JFK conspiracies. So one of the reasons he made this episode was as an answer to JFK. Because in the 2-parter, it's very clear that Oswald acts alone.
Mm-hmm.
I think because at the end, Sam, being taken over by Oswald, almost becomes the guy who shoots the president himself. Mm-hmm. But then he leaps, and there is a slightly controversial ending. Would you like to talk about that?
I remember watching this. This was like a big deal. I remember in my household, we had to watch the JFK episode. Mm-hmm. So at the end, he leaps into one of the bodyguards. The Secret Service. Yeah, Secret Service guys. And the assassination happens. And then they're sitting at the hospital, and Al's telling Sam, well, you were supposed to save Jackie.
Yeah, the whole idea is because, there's the bodyguard that runs and jumps on the back of the limousine after the president shot and shields Jackie. Well, come to find out, that was Sam Beckett. We're taking that bodyguard's thunder away because Sam did that.
You see my face?
And so what she was saying is that in the actual, and this kind of goes to what CW was saying about alternate timelines, is this goes to the idea that in the original timeline, both Jackie and Kennedy were killed. But because Sam leaped into the Secret Service agent, he saved Jackie.
But wouldn't he have remembered that from his own timeline?
Well, no, because he has Swiss cheese memory.
Oh, that's true.
But Al would.
Yeah.
Al would know that.
I don't know. I just didn't I remember being like, I felt like I got gypped in that episode. I remember watching it going, what? No.
Well, we're about to get to
I was a little annoyed by that episode.
We're going to get to an even more controversial one for you, I think. But first, yes. I want to hit a couple of these episodes in the High Concept season. One in particular that I really like that no one ever talks about is Killing Time.
Okay, I thought you were going to say something else.
And Killing Time was fascinating because this entire episode is set in the future, and Al is the star of the episode. Mm-hmm. That's where Sam leaped into a serial killer. And you remember the person Sam leaps into him as well in the future. And they're held kind of against their will in the waiting room. Well, this guy, the serial killer, escapes in Sam's body, knocks out a bunch of people at Project Quantum Leap and escapes. And Al has to track him down because if this serial killer starts murdering women in the future, he's in Sam's body. So that's the end of Sam right there. So it's a really neat kind of concept of how you change the whole format of the show. Mm-hmm. And we did get to see a little bit of Sam doing his mission, and Gushy was the guidance guy with the handset. But the most of the episode was Al tracking the serial killer in Sam's body, and Al being put into positions where it's him or the serial killer, and it's like, I can't kill this guy because that's Sam. If I kill Sam's body, he's never coming back.
Yeah.
And so it was a neat episode, and no one really talks about Killing Time, but it was a good one. There were some other interesting episodes throughout that season. As I said, it was High Concept.
They did everything.
There was an element they brought into it, which we can't go into in great detail, but there was an evil leaper.
Yes, the evil leaper. I remember, yeah.
Aaliyah, I think her name was. Mm-hmm. And you find out that rather than being a scientist, she was actually a person that died. And her version of hell is the devil is making her leap into people and doing the reverse of Sam.
Yeah.
So she's actually making wrong
she's giving him more stuff to fix.
She's fucking his whole deal. And she has a demon lady who's kind of like Al, who's her observer. Really interesting concept. I liked the evil leaper. I remember as a kid, I was like, oh, that's so fascinating. And Sam they could only see each other if they touched. Because if Sam touched her or if she touched him, they would see one another as who they really were. And they realized, oh, you're my enemy. But the thing was, Sam, always being the Boy Scout, tried to save her and wanted to help her and get her out of this situation. And she kind of fell for him a little bit. So you had the evil leaper, who actually isn't so bad. She's just stuck in a situation she can't get out of. Unfortunately, the evil leaper thing, even though she appeared in 3 episodes in the final season, that never really wrapped up.
No, it didn't.
We don't know what happened to her, which is kind of a shame. But she, as I said, appeared in 3 episodes. Another episode, Dr. Ruth. Sam leaped into Dr. Ruth. And that episode is...
That is the funniest.
It's so funny for so many reasons.
It's so ridiculous. He's Dr.
Because he has to save this woman who's being sexually harassed by her boss. But the thing is, Sam gets physical at certain points, because we haven't talked about this, but Sam, on top of having 7 doctorates, is also a talented martial artist. He knows 3 or 4 different kinds of martial arts. And he's like beating people up as Dr. Ruth.
And it would show like Dr. Ruth.
But that's the thing. Remember in the reflection, it wasn't Dr. Ruth. It was like some stunt double who looked nothing like Dr. Ruth.
I know.
So he's in Dr. Ruth's body, but you would see him in the mirror when he's doing all the like the little poses, and it would be like, okay, so who is that now? That just looks like a young woman in a gray wig. It was not great, but there is a point where like the bad guy punches Sam, and you go in. So in actual fact, this dude is punching like 4 foot tall Dr. Ruth. What an asshole! But luckily, Dr. Ruth knows karate, and he beats the living shit. And I'd love to see the Dr. Ruth side of that too, like the actual Dr. Ruth beating the shit out of him and then flip. Because remember he flips him.
I remember that.
Oh, that was so much fun. But at the end of that episode, we're actually in the waiting room when Dr. Ruth leaps, and then the next person leaps into Sam's body. And I remember that teaser very well because it was Dr. Ruth there, and she was like, next. And then she leaped, and then there was a guy that appeared in Sam's body, and the camera pushed in on him, and then he smiled, and he had vampire fangs. Yeah. And that's when you learn that Sam had leaped into a vampire. And the next episode was about him in a castle.
I'm sure that aired around Halloween.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think.
But it would have been a great Halloween episode. And of course, you know what happens in that episode because Sam looks in the mirror to see who he is at the end. Mm-hmm. And what happens? There's no reflection because he's a vampire. That one was called Blood Moon. It was a Bigfoot episode. Like I said, high concept season 5. Let's talk about your favorite episode, which was about Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, yes. Well, I will give it one thing. The costumes were, they tried to get, okay, so.
He doesn't leap into Marilyn Monroe.
No. He leaps into, was it like her bodyguard?
Yeah.
And it starts off, he saves her at a party. She OD'd or something. So he revives her. And then she's all like, oh, you're my friend. Ooh. And they become close. And there's this girl that works there. And he's kind of like, I wouldn't trust her. It's kind of like an All About Eve, which Marilyn Monroe wasn't all about Eve. You know, she wants to be the next big star. So she's using Marilyn to try to, get a role.
Yeah.
And so they basically set up that she needs to audition for the Misfits. She walks into, don't even give me some. She walks into the room. The other girl walks in. She's auditioning like, oh, because, Marilyn's always late to everything. So the other girl shows up in Marilyn's dress. And it's like auditioning. And Clark Gable's there going, oh, you're doing great. Oh. And then Marilyn shows up. And they're like, oh, it's Marilyn. And they ignore the girl. And the girl's like, right. And then, we know Marilyn gets the part, And
in the Misfits.
In the Misfits, which if you know anything about Marilyn Monroe, you know that Arthur Miller, who she was married to at the time, wrote that for her. She did not have to audition for the Misfits. And the whole thing was he saved her life and helped her get that audition so she could win her last movie role that she was ever to complete, because she did film another movie after it, but she was fired. And when they were going to rehire her back in before they started shooting, she passed away. Mm-hmm. Now, the only thing I will give that episode is the sweater is not, see, I'm sounding like a nerd now. The sweater is not exactly the same as her Mexican sweater, but they had some kind of representation of the pattern wasn't correct. But you could see they were attempting to get the clothing right. Although it was 1961 and her Poochie stuff didn't really.
I love how we're going into all these details on just this episode. None of the other ones. We just breezed by
the Poochie one, the Poochie outfits that she was wearing and what they were trying to represent is that was stuff that she wore like during 62. And this is like 61. But anyways, that really annoyed me. I'm a nerd. I'm giving you all the deets.
For more on this, watch our Marilyn Monroe.
Yes, I'm sorry, but it did kind of anger me, and I went, come on, Quantum Leap, get your historical facts right.
She's fine with all the other bad shit.
No, I wasn't. Not the Buddy Holly one.
But you don't mess with Marilyn.
Or Buddy.
But anyway, let's move on.
Yes,
because we're going to skip over.
So
I'm not even going to get started on the Elvis one.
Oh God, no.
Okay, because that was the one before the final. But I want to talk about.
20 minutes.
We're running out of time, and I want to talk about the final episode.
Okay, let's go into it.
Because the final episode was something I was so excited about. It was called Mirror Image. It was Sam. The teaser of it was Sam leapt into a doorway of a bar, and he walks and he looks at himself in the mirror behind the bar, and it's him. For the first time, he sees his own reflection, and you go, "What the hell is this?" And then you watch the episode next week, which originally was written to be a season finale.
Yeah.
It was not meant to be a series finale. After they were filming it, one of the guys at the studio said, "We're not sure if we're renewing you. So is there any possibility this could possibly work as a series finale?" And Belisario was like, maybe. So he had to do some work to make it into maybe where it could wrap up. He was hoping to have a 6th season. Unfortunately, they didn't. So this is what wound up being the series finale. The series finale was very interesting in so much as Sam was himself. He had leapt into this bar at the exact moment of his birth in 1953. And as he's in this bar, he starts to see people who are people that he had met along the way of 5 seasons worth of leaping. And he meets a bartender, and the bartender's name is Al, but it's not Dean Stockwell. Mm-hmm. And the bartender seems to know a lot about Sam. And the question throughout the episode is, Sam.
There was even a Gushy too.
There was, Gushy was there. It wasn't the actor, but there was a guy named Gushy, and he had bad breath, just like Gushy, the Gushy Sam knew. So it was really interesting. In the future, they don't know what's going on because there's no one in the waiting room. Sam has leapt. For the first time, he actually leapt the way he intended to originally, which is his entire body. He's not leaping into someone else. This is Sam as himself in the past. And there's a lot of mystery about the episode. You don't know if the bartender is somehow a mystical being. Mm-hmm. How does he know all this about Sam?
That's why I always said it was kind of like the Twin Peaks. If Quantum Leap was going to do Twin Peaks, this is the episode. And
Twin Peaks I love Twin Peaks, and I loved it in that day. And I love to watch it, and I still love to watch it. But it's not Quantum Leap.
No.
And the two vibes don't work well together. Mm-hmm. You couldn't make Twin Peaks into Quantum Leap, and vice versa, because it's too different.
Yeah.
And yes, it has a very Twin Peaksy kind of feel. And what you discover at the end of the episode is that Sam is somehow not, because the whole time you're wondering, what is this force that's leaping Sam from body to body, making him put right what once went wrong? And what you discover in the end is that the force is Sam. He's doing it he is subconsciously doing it himself. And that at any time he could choose to go home. But the implication is that Sam is such a good person that he knows there's so much wrong that has to be put right, that he puts that subconsciously ahead of himself and never wants. And actually, even though he wants to go home, he never goes home because he knows that he still has more work to do. Mm-hmm. And so to prove this, at the end of the episode, Sam, who has realized his true power, makes himself leap anywhere that he wants to leap. Because this is one thing that happens in the final episode, is Sam can now control his own leaps. So he leaps himself back to that season, the finale, where Beth was alone dancing with Al. And then he goes over to Beth and he says, Al is alive. He didn't get killed in action, and he's coming back. So wait for him. So it's a really touching moment when Sam puts Al above himself, mm-hmm. and says, I'm going to fix my friend's life because I think this would make him happier. And it does, because we find out as the whole series ends with title cards, it says that Al actually married Beth because she did wait for him, mm-hmm. and they had children together. And the real bummer that always got under my skin, even though I get it. He's too good to ever put someone else above himself. But the bummer is at the very end, it says Dr. Samuel Beckett never returned home. So he never went home. That depressed me. That was depressing.
I was so depressed.
After watching for 5 seasons, you have this idea.
And you're a kid and you're watching.
Yeah. And you think, well, it's going to end with Sam going home.
And he gets to be with Donna.
Yes. And his family. And after all this good, he can rest easy. He's done a lot of good for a lot of people. Actually, the bartender, Al, says that. You've done a lot of good for a lot of people. But anyway, Sam never goes home, even though he can control it. He can go if he wants to. He decides to stay out there as himself now, not leaping into other people, controlling the leaps, and putting right what once went wrong.
Refreshment, is Al still able to come in and help? Not anymore.
No, because
that's right, because Al leads a different.
Because here's the thing, and the reason I know that is because for many years they talked about there being a deleted scene, and Donald Belisario said there was never an extra scene. Come to find out, they found the scene. There was a scene that was written for the very end of the episode where you see Al and Donna as an older lady. They're together in their house. And Al actually says, well, I don't know how to find him because we can't link up with him anymore. Because Ziggy can't find him. He's out there somewhere. And Al decides, and Donna approves, of him going into the accelerator and trying to find Sam. So Al is going to go and start leaping to try and find Sam and convince him to come home. And that was meant to be the original ending. But that was cut. And so you can find it. You can go on YouTube and find the original ending of Quantum Leap and see it. Which, you know.
Well, we've been told over the years they're going to make a sequel, another series.
Well, that's the thing about it is there was a convention, actually, and in 2007, Belisario said that he had completed a script for a feature-length film of Quantum Leap. And the problem is Scott Bakula's 65, Dean Stockwell's 83. If you want to make it,
you need to hurry up.
Time's to make it.
I don't want any reboot where nobody has anything to do with anybody.
No.
I mean, I think I've read online where people are talking about, he has a kid who.
Yeah, doing a Sam having a kid and the kid going back to try. And I think we could kind of pitch an interest. We don't have time today, but we
we do have an interesting.
We could pitch an interesting quantum.
We do this actually. We come up with like ideas that we could pitch to a.
Yeah, and we're one day we're going to do our whole show on the Star Wars pitch.
Yeah, we got a Star Wars pitch built up. Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, I know NBC at one point was interested during the reboot fad on television of doing a reboot on a streaming platform. I say what I would like to see is Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell together for one last movie. If you just did that, I think I would be happy. Yeah. I don't even need a new series. Who knows? But, I think what we have is really good. Did I absolutely love the series finale? I didn't love it because it was a little disappointing.
It was a bummer.
It broke my little heart back in 1991 or whatever, 92. But yeah, so that's Quantum Leap. That's our show on the great series Quantum Leap. Let's give some credit. Mike Post, who did a lot of themes, wrote that theme.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yes, because we've been humming it enough. There you go, Mike Post. But anyway, thank you guys for joining us on the chat. I hope you enjoy Quantum Leap as well as much as we do.
Well, I like time travel stuff.
You can jump on Hulu and watch the entire series. As far as I know, they have every episode on there, and I highly recommend that you do that. Don't you?
Yes, watch it.
Watch it.
Oh boy!
And we'll get up with you again next week for all new episode. Until then, make sure to take care of yourselves.